Welcome everybody to NEWCOM and Neverfail's webinar series. This is part one of the webinar series, Avoiding Catastrophic Systems Disruption in a Pandemic Environment. I'm very excited to welcome your presenter for the day, Michael Wrightson, General Manager of Neverfail. Michael is a business continuity expert with a tremendous storied career in business continuity, over 10 years with Neverfail, 15 years in the industry. So he's prepared a tremendous presentation for us today to help us all understand, our DR plans, our RPOs, our RTOs. So buckle in, hold on tight, get ready for an exciting webinar. Michael, over to you.
Well, thank you all for joining today. My name is Michael Wrightson. I am, as mentioned, the GM of Neverfail. And I've been with the company for about 10 years now and been in the business for many years before that. As mentioned, I've specialized in continuity and I've done many webinars. I've talked to thousands of customers worldwide over the years. And, what we're going to talk about today is really something that is just fundamental to every organization, is being prepared for a disaster, right? And when we think about disaster preparedness, I mean, nothing can, really remind us more than what we're going through right now, right? We're in the middle of probably the worst disaster that the world's pretty much seen in probably 100 years or so. And so there are many things that we need to do in order to kind of strengthen our position, if you will, from a continuity perspective. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a series of seminars that are going to outline how we're going to help you to prepare for any type of disaster. So what you're going to be seeing today is the first of 3 presentations, and that one is called Preparing for Disaster, Planning and Implementing a Disaster Recovery Plan and Recovery Automation. So we're going to cover that today. But there's 2 more to come. So in the next few weeks after this, you'll see that you'll get an invite for another, and we hope that you join us again, Enabling Automated Recovery. This one's going to be focusing on enabling intelligent failover in an HA environment without human intervention. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit more about cybersecurity. So Avoiding Catastrophic Disruption will be our third and concluding webinar, and that will be focusing on cybersecurity aspects of BCDR. So we know that we've been going through this pandemic for about the last 6 to 8 weeks now, and you certainly are in a unique place as being responsible for IT systems for municipalities that are really critical to the response on this disaster. But we find ourselves really in historic times when it comes to continuity. Now, we just a few weeks ago, it didn't get a lot of attention, but just literally about 2 weeks ago, we had a major tornado that ripped through a town in East Texas, and it literally destroyed 70 homes and damaged 170, excuse me, and damaged 300 more, and countless people were injured based on that. So we know that this F4 tornado really just destroyed the entire town. And so that was on top of the whole COVID-19 thing. I'm sure this town really, took a beating in the last couple of weeks. But then we also have, of course, the pandemic that we're seeing today. And this is really a catastrophic event for the entire globe, which is probably very rarely ever happened. But one of the things that you're going to notice is that with things like tornadoes and things like hurricanes, they usually just happen, and you just live with the aftermath, right? But with pandemics, this is actually going on for months, if not a year. Some people say without a vaccine, we could be in this predicament for several years. So it's a big problem that we have today. And it's going to require a huge investment of time and effort to prepare for this type of disaster. And just in human terms, you can see that it's been on the news that 20% of the New York City Police Department is out on medical leave due to COVID-19. So that, and I'm sure this has affected their administration team also. So, when you're looking at this, that includes, the people who work in the front office and also the IT staff. So this is something that is really, really affected us in a profound way. So what we're going to do now is we're going to now start this presentation, and we're going to cover several areas of this preparing for a disaster. So if you look at the slide that's here, this is our agenda slide. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover why a DR plan is necessary. We're going to also talk about some considerations in your design efforts, right? We're going to talk about the implementation of a DRP. We're also going to look at a live implementation of what would a DR scenario happen if you have the right tools that are built for your disaster recovery plan. And then we'll wrap up the session, and we'll prepare you for the next one. Okay, so let's get started. So when you talk about a DR plan, why is this so important? Why do we need to have this? Well, there are several aspects of this. And when you look at a DR plan, it's kind of like a roadmap or a GPS, that gives you directions to a place that you're probably either seldom going to go or if ever, right? So although the risks are getting higher and higher every day of an impending disaster, the idea is that you want to have a plan that you hope that you never have to use, but if you do, you're fully prepared for it. So a good DRP, tries to accomplish 5 major objectives. The first is organizational survival, and that's really, I think, that everybody gets that, right? So when you're looking at having a disaster recovery plan, when you look at this historically, 80 to 90% of organizations without a BCDR plan, they fail after a disaster. And this was actually one of the statistics that was completely verified after the 9/11 attacks. So when you looked at how many, and we're talking about New York City, financial district, these guys were loaded to the hilt with technology, but some of them just didn't have the technologies and the plans in place to handle that type of complete wipeout of their businesses. So many of them didn't survive it. So when you're looking at this, you also have you want to increase your cost efficiency. So when you look at the cost of a BCDR plan, I think one of the analogies I like to use is when your mom says to you, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. While anticipating what's coming or what could happen and planning for it could really save you a fortune in the long run, right? So what's the cost of not doing anything, right? Or doing things insufficiently, and then having to pay for that on the back end. One of the things I think that was probably came to light is here in Atlanta. I actually live in the Atlanta area. Is the malware or the ransomware attack on the city of Atlanta, right? They didn't prepare properly for it, and it cost them dearly. They didn't have to pay a lot to the ransom, but they had to pay a lot from the operational impact that it cost them. We also want to ensure the employee productivity, and you want to make sure that you have the right resources, the right people in place to for your backup plan to replace or be able to replace them and supplement them in the event of a continuity event. So as we have seen in this pandemic, viruses could also wipe out your entire team. So people, if it gets in the door for some reason and gets around your IT teams, you need to be able to plan for who's going to happen if everybody's sick, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then there's also brand recognition, right? So brand management. So what happens if you have this and you didn't do all of the things that you really needed to do, and it could really take a toll on your reputation. So if you look at what happened, the Atlanta-based Equifax, they ended up having to spend $425 million to help people affected by their breach, right? So that's not a natural disaster per se, but you can see what would happen in terms of costs, and of course everybody talked about it. So they have problems with their reputation now. So these are things that could possibly happen to you in the event of disaster. So, and the final area is unpredictability, right? We know that Murphy's Law says if it can happen, it probably will. So a good DR plan assumes that unpredictable things are going to happen. So storms could come out of anywhere, and God, who knew that, back in December that we would even be in the position that we're in right now. So that tells us that unpredictable things can happen. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between business continuity and disaster recovery, because these subjects are completely different, right? They have some crossover and they are related, but the goals of both of these are completely different. So let's talk a little bit about what business continuity is. So this is typically a broader process that incorporates more than just IT, but it's also the details of what's going to happen from when you're looking at it from a comprehensive perspective across the entire organization. And so there's a whole bunch of planning that goes into a full business continuity plan. So this is really, building a full strategy to ensure that the operations of your business are, minimally impacted when it comes to a major disaster, right? So you can get back in place, get everything back in place very quickly. So there are several aspects to this. The first is the disaster planning. And this is literally the procedure for coping with massive disruptions of normal services as a result of human or natural catastrophes. The plan may be for a business, local community, region, or even a state, if you will. The second piece of this is really what we call the business impact analysis, or the BIA, but it really is a systematic process to determine and evaluate the potential effects of a disruption to critical business operations as a result of a disaster. So again, this is the analysis to see exactly if I get hit by this pandemic, or I get hit by this F5 tornado or F4 tornado, what does it do to my business, right? And where the impacts going to be are going to be within the business itself. So it's a very important. The BIA is a very important piece of this. The business continuity management is defined as the advanced planning of the preparation of an organization in maintaining business functions or quickly resuming them after a disaster is occurred, right? So now we're going into the operational aspects of this, okay? So we've come out of the initial planning and the business impact analysis, and now we're moving into a much more defined set of processes for this. And of course, the business continuity planning piece is the process of creating systems of prevention and recovery to deal with potential threats to the company. So in IT terms, these could be products and processes and services that allow you to orchestrate your recovery. It's pretty straightforward. And then finally, and probably one thing that a lot of people don't think about, is what we call the recovery time objective. And so this is literally the targeted duration of time and a service level in which the business process must be restored after the disaster or this interruption of business services, in order to avoid an unacceptable consequences to your business: loss of revenue, loss of support services, all these different things kind of play into this. So those 5 major components are part of your planning process, and the output of that is the deployment of this, right? So you get this deployed, you get it up and operational, it touches all aspects of your business or your organization, and then you have a functional continuity plan. Okay, so now that's the business continuity plan. As we mentioned, it's really kind of like the big umbrella, right? But from our perspective as IT professionals, right, we want to look at what the disaster recovery piece of this. So it is a subset of the disaster or the business continuity plan, and it's typically, focused in on technology or the technical aspects of restoring vital IT systems, right? So there are many different aspects of a disaster recovery plan. But essentially, what you want to do is you want to kind of focus in on, on getting this solidified so that you can cover multiple different aspects, right? So the first thing when and certainly in the last few years, I've kind of looked at this even more holistically than I ever did before. And I started looking at how cybersecurity is going to play a major role in this, right? So when you look at the major frameworks like NIST and ISO and CMMC and SOC, all of these frameworks require a disaster recovery plan. So this is critical because they can give you the foundational components in order to set the standards, if you will, for how you create your broader disaster recovery plan. So scope of this is very, very essential, and it keeps only the essential systems in focus, so that you don't have a plan, a disaster recovery plan that has too many components, too many systems that need to be filled that have no value. So a lot of them may not have the value to your organization that you need, but you keep it very scoped. But then having a team of people that are versed in the disaster recovery plan and having it routinely tested, right? And this is really, really critical, is to have that designated disaster recovery team. We also know that these people will have different roles and responsibilities during the continuity event. So assigning roles, responsibility, identifying who your recovery teams are, and what access they're going to have to different services. These all become part, and the access piece of it is a major component of your cybersecurity framework. So this is they really blend together really nice, and if you build your disaster recovery plan with cybersecurity in mind, with one of those frameworks, I think you're going to be very successful. And you also want to ensure that where these systems are, and how to easily enable and recover them during a business continuity event. So having the proper tools in place to be able to do this. And what you're going to hear from me through the entire presentation today is you got to test, and you got to test, and even test more. So this is very, very critical to making sure, because, and as we will see later in the presentation, it becomes a life cycle event, right? So the more you learn, the more you test, the more you put back into your process, it becomes a full life cycle process. And speaking of the life cycle, I kind of look at this from, in 4 different aspects, so 4 different phases to this. And so over the years, I kind of came up with this methodology of plan, procure, protect, improve, right? So what does that mean? So you're going to begin with your planning process. You're going to procure the assets you need to protect your infrastructure. You're going to implement them. You're going to protect them. And then you're going to make it bulletproof, right? You're going to do that testing that we talked about. So let's talk about the planning process. So in this case, you're going to put the comprehensive DRP in place, and it's going to be completely documented, and it's going to be accessible to all of your teams. You're going to make sure that the named teams are trained and how to use them. We're going to talk about this in a couple of minutes. You really want to put a tiered approach to recovery in place. And so we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. You want to decide what those technologies are that are going to protect your applications according to those different tiers that we're going to talk about. And then you have to have a backup team or a third party ready just in case your team is incapacitated. So that's the second time I've kind of mentioned this, right? And this pandemic has really shown us that we do need to have those, the backup teams, if you will, right? Our bench team just in case our starters for the football team get the pandemic. You always have to have a bench. Once we do that, we procure the technologies, and we get expert advice in, like the folks at NEWCOM. They are versed in this. They partner with us, so they are your first line of defense. And so with this technology and their all of their teams that do these every day, along with them having us as backing them up, we are this is the team that you need to be able to accomplish your a good disaster recovery plan. Then you're going to go out and you're going to implement it. The NEWCOM team can help you get this up and running, operational, fully deployed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make this bulletproof. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to test it. We're going to test it. We're going to test it again. And then you're going to take the documented gaps and you're going to roll them back into phase one, right? So this is the life cycle. So, and your business will change over time. So, people leave the organization, there's new business units, new applications and systems are always created, some are decommissioned. So this plan has to be bulletproof, it has to be tested, and you need to do this, you need to update the plan when you see these gaps arising. Typically, I like to see like an interim review before you do your DR testing, maybe a couple months before. But if you don't, you're going to learn a few things out of the testing, and then you can roll that into your plan. So what to understand when building a DR plan? So there are 5 different aspects of this, right? And so, there's a lot of things that you want to kind of take away from this process. So the first thing is we want to create a disaster recovery team. Again, I say this, and this is a big thing, is making sure that you have your teams together, that they are trained, that they are well-versed in this DR plan. All the members know what their roles and responsibilities are. This is critical. I've seen this so many times where people had some aspect of a plan, a DRP, but when they executed it, everybody was in chaos. They didn't know exactly what they were supposed to do, right? I've seen this before. I've seen this during Hurricane Sandy. I've seen it during a few other, events. Hurricane hit Houston. I've seen this when we've had earthquakes in different places. It causes chaos if people do not know what their responsibilities are. You also want to identify and assess the disaster risk, right? So your disaster recovery team should identify and assess these risks to your organization. This step should include items related to natural disasters, man-made emergencies, of course, technology-related incidents, the cybersecurity, things that we were talking about. This will assist the team in identifying the recovery strategies and technology resources required to recover from disasters with, predetermined and acceptable time frame, these RPOs and RTOs. We will talk about that also in just a couple of minutes. So the time frames for recovery are going to mean everything to your DRP plan. So, and we will get into that. And then what you're going to also look at is, determining the critical applications and documenting these resources. Every organization will have a different set of critical applications that will affect whether they are able to survive or not, whether short-term survivability along with the long-term systems that need to come online, but the short-term ones are really the ones that will decide whether you're going to be on life support or not, right? So things like, your ERP systems, your financial systems, critical IT systems like payroll, and because you guys are in municipalities and emergency services, things like jail systems and maybe the records management, you're going to have protection for records management systems, and probably one of the most important is your CAD systems, right? So all of these are critical. that you need to be able to make sure you understand them, you've documented them, and you have resources to recover them. You also want to have specified backup and recovery of to offsite storage facilities and procedures. So ensure that people, when they get over to the DR site and they need to do recoveries, they have the documentation and the procedures and the technology that they need to get this thing done, right? Nothing worse than getting over there and you know, you don't have all the tools in the toolbox to make sure that the job gets done. And then, of course, the end of the process, again, is, you know, when you're understanding how to build this, is ensuring that that test procedure is in place. There is nothing more important than that, right? If you don't test this, it's only paper. All I can tell you is it's just paper. So the testing, it operationalizes it and ensures that everybody's on the same page. All right, so what should be taken into consideration for this? So we need to understand who is impacted by the systems, and it will allow you to identify those critical systems that need to be protected and have a high value to the business. So when you do the analysis, you will be able to know what the true value versus cost is when it comes to your systems. So, and so what do I mean about this? Well, you wouldn't want to pay for an expensive, high availability system or technology for a legacy application that doesn't have a lot of value to you. You may not want to restore critical systems from backups that would cost the company in terms of revenue or, you know, or maybe services, critical services. So for example, you don't want to restore from backup your CAD system, right? Your 911 system would be offline for hours, if not maybe a day or so before you do that. So you need a much more robust type of technology for an application like CAD. And you want to make sure that your DRP is in lockstep with your cybersecurity posture that we talked about a little bit earlier. And you want to publish your SLAs. And we're going to talk about this again as we get into the RPOs and RTOs and those the tiering approaches, which are coming up next. You will see that the SLA management around this is going to be key to communicating that to your organization. And having the right people to support you, the NEWCOM folks, they are here and they have the expertise to do this. And they are very versed in Neverfail technologies. And of course, they have us to back them up also. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the RPO and RTOs, right? So what are they, right? And this is part of your part of your business impact analysis and understanding what's going to the impact of the business and assigning these SLAs, if you will. So the SLA has two components, right? The RPO is what we call the recovery point objective, and that's measured in how much data you can lose before it impacts the business in terms of time, right? So in the graphic below, when disaster strikes, right, that RPO is lost transactions. So you want to keep that as low as you possibly can. But what are the things that potentially can impact your RPO? Well, one is your replication method, right? So if you're doing scheduled snapshots that are over a period of time, every hour, every 2 hours, that increases your RPO. If you have slow bandwidth or inadequate bandwidth, that stops your replication process or slows it down tremendously. That increases your RPO. The different types of data that you have to replicate also impact the ability for you to have a low RPO, right? And also WAN acceleration. If you don't have WAN acceleration in place to give you more bandwidth, if you will, virtually, then that also impacts your ability to keep your RPO to a minimum and lose as least amount of transactions as possible. So that is the RPOs. But what is RTO? Well, the RTO, and we mentioned this a little early in the presentation, RTO is essentially how we measure how long it takes to actually recover those systems, right, in the event of a disaster in terms of time. So what impacts that type of the RTO, the ability for you to recover fast, right? Well, the recovery architecture is going to be critical to that. So you got to select a technology that has this really, really robust orchestration and automation process. It needs to be application aware, and it needs so it can see these anomalies that are happening right at the inside the application server itself. And it should be proactive, right? It should be able to respond to these. But really, having a knowledge of what's happening inside the application server, not necessarily at the hardware level. I mean, that's pretty pivotal. Everybody does that well. And I think that's pretty much, the gold standard now is you have to have redundant hardware. You really should have redundant networks. All those things are pretty much the standard now. But seeing what's actually happening within the application itself is kind of critical to seeing how to react to these types of situations. And what also can impact your RTO is your application complexity. So there's a difference between recovering a system that's on one server than it's on 10 servers, right? That's spread across 10 servers. It's different between, having a very simple application with maybe a couple services that you need to get up and not a lot of, and just communicates a little bit on the network, then has like 20 or 30 services that talk to multiple different types of systems and all talk to one another. So there's a difference. The application complexity also plays into RPO, or I should say the RTO. So together, these guys really kind of paint the picture of what happens when disaster strikes, right? And how fast you can get you back on your feet. So with that in mind, it's important to understand where the technologies that you're using to protect your systems fall in line with recovery, right? In terms of your RTOs. So we talked about the RTO, which is the recovery time objective, and that's how fast we can get those systems back online. So what we've done is, we've done here at Neverfail for a long time, is we've always looked at this holistically and said, okay, there are different types of tiers of this, and there's different types of technologies that affect the RTO. And so what we did was we kind of pulled this together into a tier 0 to tier 4 approach. And this is actually kind of proved to be the general consensus across all business continuity technology companies. So when you're looking at things like a tier 0, these are technologies that provide you continuous availability, right? So these are literally ones that can recover your systems within seconds to just a minute or two, right? These are the gold standard for being able to protect critical applications. And so these typically have some type of orchestration model. They are application aware. And so this is really a technology that is all encompassing and is designed for the most critical of IT systems. Then what you have is a tier 1 approach, which are really designed for business critical applications. Maybe you can tolerate a little bit of downtime, maybe 60 minutes, maybe 4 hours or so. And usually these are what we call high availability clustering and fault tolerance type of technologies, which use kind of things like CDP technologies for replication. These typically are implemented on top of hypervisors. I mean, there are physical server technologies that are out there, but tier 1 approach is really about giving you a little bit of breathing room for maybe the stuff that are supporting your mission critical applications, but they are in of themselves are not absolutely critical themselves. And then as you kind of go down the life cycle of different types of applications, you kind of progressively get down to systems that are more and more less critical, right? So you're talking about tier 2 through tier 4. These are now you're getting into hours, if not days, for recoveries, right? So typically, and there's different technologies that support this, but all of these are kind of built on top of backup and recovery technologies, right? So they're either local backups, snapshots using, change block tracking. Those are, typical snapshot type of backup technologies. And then as you get longer, you want to offsite some of these to backup. So if I have to pull them back, you're talking 12 to 24 hours. And maybe you have even long-term storage, and maybe like object storage, like an S3 type of thing, or maybe an Amazon S3 or compatible, or maybe even like an Azure, storage blob or whatever. So these are becoming much more, much more popular these days for longer-term backups if you have to go to them. So this slide is really kind of critical for you guys when you're doing your business impact analysis, to kind of start putting your systems into these different types of categories so that you can apply the right technologies to be able to fill those needs, those criticality needs. So implementation considerations. So usually, and now we're kind of getting into the technical aspects of this, right? So much more how you plan your disaster recovery sites and whatnot. So when you're looking at this, you want to make sure that your recovery systems are offsite, ideally to a different grid. Sometimes that's easy to do. Sometimes it's not so easy to do, right? But that's kind of the idea, right? So but if you have a data center that is kind of, has that SOC 2 and that's fully secured and it has redundant power and cooling systems, maybe the risk of not having them on the same grid is reduced, right? So, but typically you want to kind of get them off the same grid. You also want to have redundant infrastructure, things like, if you're in virtualization, you want your hosts and storage and your networking to all be redundant. You also want to have redundant WAN connections between your production and your DR site. So you want to, if somebody goes and cuts your AT&T line, you want to make sure that, you have another, maybe another company that has another channel, if you will, to get to your DR sites, right? So I've actually seen this happen too, where, guys were maybe, digging and repairing a gas line or whatever, and they cut the fiber optic cables to their data center right down the road, and everything just came to a screeching halt in the entire data center. So we don't want to see those types of things happening. Make sure you have redundant and resilient WAN infrastructure. You also want to have strong and experienced technology partners like NEWCOM, and they can really help you guys to plan this out. They are very versed in this. They're very experienced. They can really do a great job in helping you. And they can also bring in other experts that support them, right? So like the Neverfails of the world, right? So we have also 20-year bench within our organization also. So we are here to support them who support you, right? So they have the expertise to be able to do that. And we also want to build that tiered approach that we just talked about in the previous slide. So these are kind of like the things that you need to consider during the design process. And so how does automation play a key role into fast recovery? So this is kind of the icing on the cake, right? So we talked about the planning process so far. We talked about the considerations. We talked about the selection of different type of technologies based on the tierings. And now when we get to the most critical applications, automation, as we mentioned, in like your tier 1 or tier 0, tier 1, is going to make all the difference in the world. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you have a tested and proven orchestration playbook that has a repeatable process. You want to make sure that you have the lowest RPOs and RTOs, right? So you want a technology that just gives you almost instant on if something fails. You want to be able to reduce the requirement of staff, right? So as far as being able to have those people available to help you recover. So you want to put as much automation into this as possible. I guess the key is you want to make it as easy as possible so that a person who may not even understand technology can go in and can read a set of instructions and say, push this button and make sure everything happens, right? That's kind of what you want to get to. Now, in reality, it's probably not always that simple, but you want to make sure that you're trying to get this as simple as possible so that you don't need an army of people to make this happen. You also want to make sure that you have technology that is application aware and can see when users and applications and services and hardware and networking issues arise and can automatically react to those. By creating this, you increase your reliability for a successful event, and you want it to be easy, right? You don't want to be stressed. The last thing you want to do, you got the stress of this a catastrophic event happening. You don't want the stress of knowing whether your disaster recovery plan is going to work or not, right? That just doubles all the stress on everybody. Okay, so this kind of brings us to our demo. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my environment. And 1 second. And so let me change over to my remote desktop. And so, okay, I think everyone can see that. Jim, can you see this? Can you see my environment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little bit of what we've actually just experienced here in the presentation and kind of show you what this all means when we kind of pull this all together and when it's done right, right? So with Continuity Engine, we've kind of, since we've been doing this for almost 20 years, we kind of wrote the book on continuous availability, right? So we, our team looked at this many moons ago, and we saw that there was a lot of gaps that were in, typical, BCDR plans, and especially the technologies that were out there to support it. So we built the technology, and it's evolved over the years to really address all of the potential things that could possibly happen. So what you're seeing here is the console for Continuity Engine. It's called the Engine Management Service. Notice that there is a status here, and it shows a graphical representation of a protected application. In this case, it's SQL Server. So what we've done is we've set this up so that we have a DR deployment. We actually have a 3-node cluster. These guys right here are a HA pair, or high availability, in one data center, in our Austin data center. And this is our DR system that's over in our Kansas City data center, okay? All of the green lights show, our lines actually here show that they are replicating, and they're replicating real time. And this tells you exactly how everything should look when everything is operating properly within Continuity Engine. So let's kind of go through a use case here. So say we had an outage and we lost our data center, and we called an emergency, or maybe we know that there's a hurricane coming, or maybe we know that the area, there's a flood coming, or whatever it may be, right? We know that a disaster is imminent, right? So what you're going to see here is that right now, my server, my primary server, which is my production, that has an IP address of 0.20. Just going to go ahead and ping him real quick so you can actually see how this is responding. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my SQL Management Studio, and I want to kind of demonstrate how quick the replication process is. So let me go ahead and delete a few of these databases. I'll delete a couple more here. All right, so we got rid of these. I'm going to add back a new one. Guess we can't delete gens for some reason. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new database. We'll call this Tommy. And so we have Tommy's database. The ones that are gone, we have Ann's. So we have databases here that we've just created. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the engine management service, and I'm going to say we just declared a disaster, and I need to move my workloads over to my DR site. Now, just so you understand, our HA pair, which you hear, are in our Austin data center, but this is in our Kansas City data center, and that's about 760-ish miles away from each other. So what we're going to do is we've declared an emergency. We know that the data center is down. We just went into Continuity Engine and said, bring up my DR copy or my tertiary server and make that the active node on the network. So Continuity Engine is very intelligent in what it does. So it will first look to see if the systems are still online, and it can talk to them, and it will try to do a clean shutdown and move them over. So if you know the night before that the hurricane is coming, like we did, like in the Florida disasters, or maybe in Houston, we actually had one customer that did that. They saw this the hurricane that was coming to Houston. They switched over to their data centers that were probably 30 miles north of Houston, and once the whole disaster was over, their data center was 18 feet underwater. So they did the right thing, and this all worked just like this. So essentially, you transfer control over to your tertiary server, and in a moment, you'll see that this will transition and will become active on the network. There we go. So now you have a tertiary server that is now the active node, right? Now 750 miles or 760 miles away, we have a tertiary server. And now let's kind of go back and see what happens here, all right? Now we're going to ping our tertiary server. Same username, or the same host name, right? We just pinged it, and now we got a different IP address because we updated the DNS in the background to make this work, the orchestration process, right? Making sure that all of this kind of comes together and works end to end with the entire process, switching over, bringing the system up, spinning up those services, getting the application up and running. Everything is done, and also doing the DNS change. And if I go over to here and go ahead and just create a new database, we create a new database for Manny. And I just created one now. He's created on the tertiary server, right? But notice this, right? Let me go ahead and just refresh this. Notice that all of the ones I deleted on the primary have replicated over the tertiary. And then Tommy's is there. We created just before before we did this, the failover. And then Manny's is the one we just created here. So we have all of the databases. And so this is how easy it is. What we want to do is we want to get to a point where we can just push a button and the orchestration process just takes care of the rest, right? But that's not all. What if we have to bring it all back? So wonder, a week later, actually in this case of the folks over in Houston, it took them almost 6 months to bring all their stuff back from DR. But when they did, they got their systems up and operational in their data center once they repaired it and dried it all out and put the new systems in and copied all of their stuff back. Then they brought up their cluster, and then they resynchronized everything back over to the primary and secondaries. Then all they had to do is then just say, I need a 5-minute window to bring this all back from our DR site. So I'm going to make our primary server active. And the same process you use to bring it all over is the same process you use to bring it all back. So it just basically reverses the entire process. But in this case, we didn't lose the data center. We basically are just transitioning the workloads back. So we do a nice controlled shutdown of the DR site, and then we're bringing on our production server We're spinning up the services. We're making sure that the replication from the tertiary to the primary is complete. And then we do the transition by revealing it to the network, doing the DNS update, and finally reversing the replication process. So now everything would be back to normal once this transitioning process is complete. But notice how fast this thing is, right? So you're talking about downtimes of less than a minute and a half. I mean, it's, in fact, during this, this is typical what you see with most applications. It's now you're going through the startup of the primary application, which is our SQL server, and in a moment you'll see it the arrows transition, and you'll have an active primary server. And so this is kind of the end. This is the end-to-end process that you want to get to, where now you're able to transition workloads between different data centers quickly and easy. And now you can see the primary server is active on the network. And of course, we go back here real quick. He should ping back at 0.27, which he does. And if I go here, we'll add a new database. Call it Willie. And we have Willie's database and we have Tommy's database. So this is the process that we use, guys, for providing this continuous availability model to all of our customers. So with, again, NEWCOM is your go-to partner with this. They are versed in our, developing these recovery process, these DRP plans, and they are very versed in our technology and know how to get this implemented. So just a little bit about our company, right, to kind of wrap this up. I mentioned this earlier, we're 20 years into this. We were a consulting company before this. We have 4,000 plus direct customers in over 40 countries. And we have a slew of OEMs. We have a lot of partners that we've actually integrated directly with our products, with their products. And if you add our OEM partners, we're probably in the tens of thousands of customers worldwide. And this is all we do. Continuity Engine is really our core technology, and it's still relevant. Everybody needs this type of technology. We support Windows 2008 R2 server applications to 2012, and we are only in version 8.5. We're going to get ready to roll out our 9.0 product in the summer, probably in July or early August. So you can that testifies to fact of the maturity of this type of technology. So at this time, I think I'll just turn it over to Jim. Jim, thanks.
Thank you very much, Michael. Exceptional content. That demo is pretty slick. Now, I'm always impressed at how quickly the system can replicate. So thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for joining us. We did mention that part 2 and part 3 are coming up quickly. May 21st is part 2 of our webinar series. That'll be at 1 p.m. Expect a calendar invite or a reminder for that. And then June 11th, we'll be doing part 3. In the meantime, if you have any questions or if you need any assistance, reach out to our team. You can get us directly, sales@newcomglobal.com, and one of our engineers will be able to answer your questions and help you out. So thank you, Michael, for presenting today, and thank you, everybody, for joining our call. Have a wonderful day.